Peter Magubane was a South African photographer born in 1932 who grew up in the Johannesburg township of Sophiatown and lived the majority of his life under oppressive apartheid rule. He was a product of his time and place, and his experiences during this turbulent era defined his perspective and his mission as a photographer. Magubane's inside perspective as a Black South African raised in the townships made his photos unique and, in my opinion, more powerful than other white or foreign photographers who documented the struggle from the outside looking in. Magubane was driven from an early age to take part in documenting social issues that affected the oppressed Black population in his country. He devoted his career to photojournalism in an effort to disseminate the egregious reality of South African apartheid to the world as a proponent for the freedom of his people. As a photojournalist, Magubane's work was presented to the public via domestic and eventually international channels of printed media, such as Drum Magazine, Rand Daily Mail newspaper, National Geographic, Time Magazine, and Life Magazine. Being on assignment during the 1950s and 60s when Magubane's career began was neither easy nor legal, and this brought an entirely new character to his images. Photographers and the press were not allowed to carry a camera or take photos if the police were present. Magubane describes being forced to hide his camera in a hollowed-out Bible, firing with a cable release in his pocket, or in a hollowed-out loaf of bread and pretending to eat while shooting. Taking pictures was not a hobby or an art form in the early days, but the only hope for social change, which put the lives of photographers at risk. Magubane was arrested, beaten, and shot in pursuit of this mission. Throughout his career, he was banned from photography for 5 years and spent 6 months in prison, and in total close to 600 days in solitary confinement. In describing the importance of his work, Magubane states, "I wanted to use my camera so that I could show the world what is happening in my country. If the world gives assistance, they will give assistance because they have seen photographically what is happening. Struggle without documentation is not struggle." Magubane's examination of the government-sanctioned injustice in South Africa focused on the day-to-day hardships of real people and their enduring resistance against apartheid. The dehumanization of Blacks was a particular focal point of South African society that Magubane chose to document. This photograph of Magubane's portrays a central tool of the apartheid government to execute this dehumanization, the Dome Pass, which all Blacks were forced to carry at all times to severely limit their movement. This image draws attention to the power of these passes. Magubane effectively objectifies this man and equates his worth to this piece of paper. The congregated mass of people seen just beyond the pass sheds light on the widespread impact of this policy and how it served to control the location, movement, and associations of South African Blacks. Magubane's documentation of European-only zones was another theme consistently present in his portrayal of the dehumanizing policies which characterized this time. This famous image of Magubane's very powerfully depicts the marginalization that took place and the stark divide between whites and the minorities of South African society. His choice to photograph a white child underlines the fact that color transcended all spheres of society, including age. Under all circumstances, Africans were inferior to those of European descent. Not only were minorities marginalized geographically in terms of where they were legally designated to live and work, but seemingly trivial parts of everyday life like benches and toilets were classified by race. The display of these two words were grounds to beat, arrest, or kill any who defied them. Magubane's portraits were also famous for demonstrating the toll apartheid took on Blacks mentally and physically. The image above provides the viewer with a sense of the calloused, hard exterior Africans in apartheid society were forced to adopt to survive, and both the mutual feeling of sadness, hopelessness, and anger which swept this population. This impoverished woman seems trapped and unable to move beyond this deteriorating dwelling, which symbolizes the suffering and lack of upward mobility of her people. Her piercing eyes and aged skin speak to the hardship she has faced throughout her life. Beyond his portrayal of the African experience on an individual level, Peter Magubane throughout his career covered many of South Africa's historical moments and turning points in the evolution of apartheid, which included the Sharpeville Massacre of 1960, the Rivonia Trials of 1964, and the 1976 Soweto Uprising. Throughout his photographs, he was able to capture the collective sentiments and passions of an entire people as the anti-apartheid movement gathered momentum. These images reflect the anger, determination, sorrow, and strength of Black South Africans. They also portrayed the power of a community united. Peter Magubane is now considered a freedom fighter with a camera during the apartheid era in South Africa. Magubane and others like him were critical to the struggle for freedom in that they were one of the only channels of disseminating the truth of the oppression and brutality during this era to the nation and the rest of the world. The ethically evaluative photographs of Peter Magubane shed light on and challenged elements of society in an extremely influential way and drew public focus to these facets of life in a manner that generated momentum enough to create political change.